Joseph Cillo Jr. I am the writer of my latest novel, When the Wood is Dry, an edgy Catholic thriller. I'm also the creator and writer of Blind Prophet comic books and graphic novels, and my Christmas book, Merry Friggin' Christmas, an edgy Christmas comedy. Okay, so I'm here to talk about my series of videos, which is called The Catholic Writer's Edge, where we're going to explore some of the advantages that a Catholic writer has. And we've been talking about some of the edgy Catholic types of writing and stories. So this is episode 2. In the first episode we talked a bit about the different kinds and types of Catholic stories and elements of stories that you could bring to bear that are natural and fit into the Catholic perspective and will resonate with people in general, humanity, but specifically with Catholics. And today we're going to talk about, in episode 2, we're going to delve a little bit more deeply into the Christ-like story, and we're going to talk specifically about prophecy and fulfillment. Now, in the Jesus story, it's mostly the prophecy of a coming Messiah, or the prophecy of a returning king, but there are other prophecies as well that you can instill into your story, and it will resonate as a kind of a Christ-like story, okay? Now, the examples I'm going to use are not necessarily from Catholic writers, okay? But the elements resonate as kind of Catholic elements. I didn't look up what everybody's religious perspective was. I just looked at the works that I was familiar with and culled out some of the Christ-like elements in those stories. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Jesus story. So, Jesus' story begins before his birth, okay? If you read the Gospel of John, what it says is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word is Jesus, right? So, his story begins in the beginning. Now, that's a type of story that's kind of hard to write. Because it really is only one, you have 3 persons in the beginning. You got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, okay? But this idea of a coming Messiah that's prophesied and meeting that prophecy, well, that's one that you can mine a little bit, and it has been mined, and it's been done in a number of fantasy kind of settings or science fiction settings in other worlds and that kind of thing. Doing it in our world gets a little tricky because we've already had the coming of the Messiah, right? So we don't want to be blasphemous here and have some kind of other Messiah come, because he's already come in our world. But as a Catholic writer, you have this element of a story that you can work into your writings, and it's part of the quote-unquote greatest story ever told, right? It's part of the Jesus story, but it's only a small part of it, really. So that story is, as we mentioned, if the Jesus story was a work of fiction, if it wasn't true, it would be the greatest story ever written. It's just fantastic, all the elements, how they come together in that story. Now, there's one other way you can do the coming of a child, and that would be in the Antichrist theme. And we've seen that in some horror movies, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. So let's talk about some examples. If you think about Frank Herbert's classic fantasy, Dune, well, this is a pretty obvious Messiah fulfillment story. So this Paul Atreides is the character, and his mother is kind of a prophetess. Jessica is what they call a Bene Gesserit witch, so she has some kind of superpowers. But they're politically savvy, and they're trying to manipulate themselves to fit the prophecy. So when this character actually fits the prophecy, you can view it as a cynical thing that they did this to gain power, and he was able to manipulate himself to fit the prophecy. So he's maybe a kind of false prophet in that sense. But prophecies are tricky. So when you meet a prophecy, even if you did something sneaky to do it, if you met the prophecy, you kind of met the prophecy, right? So a lot of times they're met in unexpected ways. It's kind of the nature of prophecy, right? Or a common element of prophecy stories. If you think about the movie The Matrix, well, Matrix is the prophecy is the one will come who will be able to control the Matrix and free humanity from the slavery to the machines. And the Neo character is the one who fits this and is able to, be the one and meet the prophecy. Now this is probably a little bit less directly religiously based, but it just calls back religion and the idea of a religious prophecy. Now, one of our favorite stories, our edgy Catholic favorites, is The Lord of the Rings. And in The Lord of the Rings, the Aragorn character, he has his own little prophecy, right? And it's pretty explicit. He's got his own little poem that goes with it, right? So the poem is, all that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. So here we got the character Aragorn, who is a crownless king, who's going to restore the blade and become the king again and set things right in the kingdom, the return of the king, which is the name of the third book of the trilogy here. So that's a pretty direct reference to the returning king element of the prophecy story, which is one of the Jesus prophecies. He's going to return as king. And we know that Tolkien was a Catholic, and that this is really a direct kind of reference to a Christ-like character. Now, the prophecy of a child to be born, okay? Now, in our modern world, we kind of mentioned this. This is kind of hard to pull off. I mean, the Christmas story, everybody knows it, and you can probably set it in some kind of a fantasy land and maybe get away with it, but it's going to be hard to do, right? Because it's just so direct and obvious and on the nose, and it's going to just be calling back the Christmas story is going to be really a little bit difficult to pull off. But what can be pulled off is kind of the opposite story. The inversion of the story is the Antichrist story to be born. Now, this has been a popular idea in a lot of different movies, and you can think of the Omen, and you can think of Rosemary's Baby, and even like that Schwarzenegger movie, The End of Times, where they're trying to actually prevent the conception of the child, so it's actually before the child was born or conceived that they're getting involved in the stopping the Antichrist child from coming about. So this is another trope that's kind of available to a Catholic writer, and it calls back kind of the Jesus prophecy story. Now, I used an element of the prophecy in my book, When the Wood is Dry, an edgy Catholic thriller. Now, in this story, I am going for an element of the Jesus prophecy story that's a little less typical, okay? Jesus met a prophecy in the book of Isaiah of the suffering Messiah. And the call in my book is a pretty explicit call in a vision of my character to a path of suffering. So she meets Jesus in a dream, and Jesus says, sometimes we must suffer if we are to save souls. And again, this is calling right back directly to the Jesus story. He suffers for the sake of mankind to be the sacrifice to save souls. And that's the path, the imitation of Christ, that he's calling this kind of saint-like character on in my story. So I hope you will check it out and see what you think of that element of the prophecy and the fulfillment of the prophecy, which in this case is a pretty hard prophecy to fulfill. Okay, so my name is Joseph Cillo Jr. Again, this is edgycatholic.com. My series is the Catholic Writer's Edge, and today's episode is the Christ-like character, prophecy, and fulfillment. Thank you very much.